In one of our recent videos, we talked about the obsolescence of tech gadgets. Well, you should know that in the world of technology, there are also companies that can become obsolete. There are some very big tech companies that missed the shift to the internet and others that missed the shift to mobile computing. And right now, there's a lot of talk, at least among tech enthusiasts, about Apple possibly missing the shift to artificial intelligence. And even as I'm speaking to you, the ultimate humiliation. Apple is forced to sign with Google so that Gemini becomes the engine behind Siri, just to stay somewhat in the race. Well, in this video, I'm going to go with a pretty crazy, kind of wild hypothesis. Actually, we're going to ask ourselves if Apple isn't fundamentally an anti-AI company. Before we start, it's important to be precise with our words. When we talk about artificial intelligence in this video, we're talking about generative artificial intelligence, the kind we know from ChatGPT and all the others. This artificial intelligence that we're flooded with today through videos and photos. Because let's be clear, historically, Apple is not at all anti-AI in the broad sense. They were even ahead on things like machine learning and advanced computing. For a very long time, Apple has equipped its products with a neural engine. Basically, there are plenty of things at Apple that run on AI, except Apple doesn't say it's AI. But on the other hand, we can still wonder if even at the core of Apple's DNA, there's not something that's fundamentally at odds with this generative artificial intelligence. I'll take this opportunity to pause this video for a moment to talk to you about our sponsor, and our sponsor is Make. As we'll see in this video, the problem with artificial intelligence isn't always the artificial intelligence itself, but rather the way we use it. And if there's one area where artificial intelligence can really help you, it's organization. Organizing work and tasks. Because I think we're all the same. We're flooded all day long with tons and tons of micro tasks. We work together on a project. There are back and forths, files here and there, emails to read and sort. And then in companies, we all tend to use different software or use them differently. In short, even simple tasks can become extremely complex with all these micro tasks to manage. And in the end, all this digital noise slows everyone down. And that's where Make becomes really useful. Make is an automation platform. It uses a visual interface, so no coding is required. You build workflows and even AI agents easily and quickly, and you'll see everything happening in real time on a grid. It's called Make Grid. And that's very reassuring because as a result, the processes become clear and readable. You keep control and you can follow the workflow step by step. Really, I want to emphasize this. You don't need to be a developer to create complex workflows. You can stick with no code, but you can also go for low code if you want to take it further. And the best example, well, in the end, is us, Nowtech. We use Make for certain tasks that aren't necessarily complicated, but are time consuming and where we can't afford to make mistakes. You probably know we have a garage sale where we resell equipment we don't use to our community. To manage this garage sale, we have a dedicated email. That way, potential buyers can contact us. And the problem was that we weren't checking this inbox consistently or carefully, and that led to mistakes. Thanks to Make, we connected this email to Gemini. We prompted Gemini with specific instructions about what we wanted, so it generates a summary of each email. And to make them easier to read at a glance, these summaries are automatically sent to our Discord channel linked to the garage sale. For us, it saves a lot of time and we no longer have the stress of forgetting things. We're actually looking into using Make for other tasks as well, repetitive tasks, for example, automated posts on social media. So, in any case, for us, we've adopted Make. And that's really one of Make's strengths. It's that it works with a huge number of applications. There are more than 3,000. I think you won't have any trouble finding the tools you use every day, but actually the best way to convince you is really for you to try Make. You get a month of the Make Pro plan, so the full Make, completely free. You could do up to 10,000 operations with the link I'm putting in the description. So, it's really a great opportunity to try it out, and I think you'll be surprised by how much time you can save thanks to Make. In any case, we want to thank Make once again for allowing us to bring you this video, and now let's get back to the topic of the video. And what if Apple, in the end, was actually against artificial intelligence? In fact, if you know Apple well, you know they have an obsession. It's the user experience. Since the Steve Jobs era, Apple has always built its reputation on the idea that it just works. Unlike computing that's a bit complicated. At Apple, you press a button, you tap an icon, and it produces a result that's predictable. And not just predictable, but reproducible and perfect. Apple doesn't always get things right, they make mistakes, but that's generally how they position themselves. If I wanted to use fancy words, I'd say that Apple's DNA is rooted in a kind of rigorous technological determinism. And generative artificial intelligence, the kind we've known for 3 or 4 years, is kind of the antithesis. Large language models are based on probabilistic systems. They don't know the truth. They predict the next word or concept based on probabilities. As a result, we have all these problems with generative artificial intelligence, like hallucinations and errors, and so it creates a real clash. At Apple, reliability is super important, and artificial intelligence is a bit of trial and error. The results are random, but all that can't be the only explanation for Apple's distrust of artificial intelligence. Apple, ever since its beginnings, has always had a strong culture of secrecy. They're not really fans of anything open source. And research in generative artificial intelligence from the very beginning has, on the contrary, been a very open field. In fact, if you followed the early days of ChatGPT and generative artificial intelligence, there were a lot of collaborative projects, a lot of sharing. This is what allowed for the rapid acceleration of the technology. At Apple, there is a very paranoid culture, a culture of secrecy. The teams work in silos that are very isolated from each other. You can be working on a project and have no idea what the team next door is working on. So that can cause major problems for the development of a language model internally at Apple, because the company culture is the complete opposite. But we can go even further. The target audience for Apple products, or at least the core target for Apple products, Apple has always seen itself, and these are Steve Jobs' words, as a bicycle for the mind. A form of computing that amplifies the user's abilities, but without replacing the user. However, generative artificial intelligence in its latest developments, especially the agentic variants, tends to want to replace the user. It's the AI that will write your email. It's the AI that will compose the music. It's the AI that will generate an image, a photo. And Apple has always had creatives at the heart of its customer base, in the broad sense. And that's going to be a big problem for Apple. If AI does the creative work instead of the creatives, well, that's the antithesis of their core audience. In fact, Apple finds itself a bit stuck between the technological need to keep up with advances in artificial intelligence and the need to avoid alienating its user base. Artists, designers, illustrators, musicians, and writers have always been strong supporters of Apple, and they use their Macs, their iPhones, their iPads as creative tools. And that's the challenge for Apple. How to integrate generative AI into their products without replacing creative people. All of this clearly shows that in the end, Apple has been uncomfortable with generative artificial intelligence for the past 3 or 4 years. This means that Apple has made some choices that turned out to be a bit risky, and that's one of the reasons for the delay. First, we could say that they really bet on mixed reality. They made a bit of the same mistake as Meta. They devoted huge resources, attention, and engineering talent to the Vision Pro and spatial computing. In fact, you could say that Apple kind of bet that the next big thing was going to be VR and AR, right in the middle of the generative artificial intelligence boom. So there was already a timing issue there. And it's even more unfortunate because Siri, which is supposed to be the interface, the assistant that shows off the power of artificial intelligence, well, Apple actually had a real head start with Siri. Siri came out in 2011. They were a bit of a pioneer with this ambitious concept of a voice assistant. And today, 14 years later, Siri is pretty much synonymous with stupidity, and I'm choosing my words carefully. I try Siri from time to time, but it's impossible to have a conversation with her. We're miles away from what we can do today with a chatbot like ChatGPT or Gemini. We might occasionally use Siri to turn on the lights, but we absolutely can't use it for anything else. It's really frustrating. We often end up with the famous, well, I'll look it up on the web. Now, that's often replaced by, well, I don't really know, let's ask ChatGPT. And tomorrow it'll be, well, I'll let Gemini answer for me. And we still have a hard time explaining this total stagnation. In 2024, Apple said they were going to revolutionize Siri. It's 2 years later and Apple vaguely announces that Siri 2.0 is coming. And they have to announce it in a very humiliating way, telling us Siri 2.0 is coming and it's going to be powered by Gemini. So I know that some of you, and I felt the same way, were thinking, well, Apple is taking a little time. They're used to taking their time. They like to polish things. They're going to make something really good for us. We know that Apple is never the first with new tech, but they end up making things that are really, really useful afterwards. Here, what we realize is that there hasn't been any progress, that Apple is really in a bad spot. They have nothing to offer internally. 2 years is still a very long time, and now another 2 years will be added. And actually, all of this hides a very serious problem happening at Apple, which is the brain drain, and the little brains are running away. Actually, you might not be aware, but if you follow tech news between 2023 and today, there has really been what we call a brain drain, an exodus of the best people from Apple's artificial intelligence team. Wei-Ming Pan was the chief architect of Apple's language models. He left for Meta, and a good part of the team did too, while others went to OpenAI or elsewhere. One could say it's the lure of money, that they just got better offers from other companies, but it's often more complicated with high-level engineers. An engineer, for his own career, needs to work at the company that's on the cutting edge, the company that's hot right now, the company that's moving forward. It can be very risky for an engineer of that caliber to work at a company that's becoming outdated. And we can also talk about working conditions, research conditions. We talked about it earlier, but this silo culture, this culture of secrecy, and also this culture of privacy at Apple are obstacles to real progress on language models. It's commendable for Apple to want to work like that, but it's still entering a race with a serious handicap. So, does that mean Apple is doomed? Does that mean it's the end for Apple? To get you to click on the video, that's what it would sound like, but we have to be a bit more subtle than that. Actually, that's still true. Apple missed a technological turning point. But does that mean going off track is fatal? In any case, as of early 2026, everything is going well at Apple. They've never sold as many iPhones as they do now. They became market leaders in 2025, and that proves something very interesting for what's coming next. The thing is, artificial intelligence, the buzzword of artificial intelligence, is something important for manufacturers, but it hasn't really caught on with consumers. And actually, the head of Dell said recently, we don't sell computers because of artificial intelligence. In fact, for the general public, it's not really a selling point or a deciding factor to say this iPhone has more AI features. This lag in artificial intelligence has consequences for Apple. It has consequences for investors who are worried. As we've seen, it affects both recruitment and retaining talent at their company. But apart from a few technophiles, meaning us, no one is worried about Apple's lag in artificial intelligence. And even the fact that Apple actually lied about the iPhone 16 because they released an iPhone saying it was ready for Apple Intelligence, even though Apple Intelligence wasn't actually ready. Well, the regular Apple users and buyers didn't feel betrayed at all. They rushed to get the iPhone 17. So does that mean that in the end, this video is useless? That this delay in artificial intelligence will have no consequences for Apple? I think we're jumping to conclusions a bit too quickly here. It could still have an impact on Apple's brand image in the long term with consumers. Apple isn't seen as a particularly innovative company, but on the other hand, this delay is starting to give Apple the image of being an outdated company. The iPhone is going to become the smartphone for boomers and Generation X, an old people's thing. And yet, if we look more closely, some clues might show us that Apple is getting ready for a comeback. And if this plan B works, it could pull off a real masterstroke. Actually, generative artificial intelligence isn't old. Look at what we were doing 3 years ago, Will Smith spaghetti, and look at what we're doing today, Will Smith spaghetti. The evolution is crazy. I don't have concrete numbers, but we've rarely seen a technology evolve this fast. But at the same time, AI saturation is coming very quickly too. They're trying to put artificial intelligence everywhere and in everything. And for the public on social media, we can't take this flood of AI anymore. We end up with generated images that are at best in poor taste and at worst shameless propaganda. There's a technological arms race around artificial intelligence that's driving up the cost of computing for consumers. The energy bill is frightening. And for the general public, those who aren't tech savvy, what they see emerging from artificial intelligence seems extremely pointless and dangerous, and I don't blame them. It's true that what stands out the most today in artificial intelligence is mostly all the negative aspects. And on top of that, there's a huge economic threat hanging over it. Many analysts fear a burst of the speculative bubble around artificial intelligence, which would probably have the same effects as the bursting of the speculative bubble around the internet in the early 2000s. And I, who lived through that period, can say that's exactly what happened. Internet was a buzzword. People were selling computers that could get on the internet. And after the bubble burst, well, internet was a given, but it was no longer a selling point. And it's precisely in this context that Apple could come out ahead. Apple could reconnect with its brand image, its marketing position from the 90s, which was think different, by adopting an I different position. In fact, Apple could position itself as the last stronghold of human creativity in the face of the wave of software automation. And actually, if you follow Apple ads, you can really feel that in their latest Christmas ad, the one they made in 2025. In fact, you see cute little forest animals singing Christmas carols. And actually, as you can see in the making of that Apple released, everything is done by hand. There are no special effects, no CGI, it's puppeteers. It's really done the old school way. This is the complete opposite of the AI aesthetic, while other big brands like McDonald's and Coca-Cola have tried to make some pretty awful AI ads. And actually, through this ad, Apple's underlying message is very powerful. Apple values craftsmanship and human creativity. Apple, we don't make artificial intelligence to replace humans. We create technology to enhance human creativity. And actually, we can see that Apple has a real window of opportunity, a real chance. And this can be reinforced by the way Apple has branded its artificial intelligence. As usual, at Apple, they always give technologies fancy names. And they did the same with artificial intelligence. They called it Apple Intelligence. What this means is that at Apple, artificial intelligence won't be the same as it is at other companies. Apple, from the very beginning, said Apple Intelligence will guarantee the protection of your privacy. Apple Intelligence will be more like a personal service. It won't be an all-knowing oracle that magically creates things. So, I know for us tech enthusiasts, all this makes us laugh. We know that in fact it's just a cover-up for Apple's delay in artificial intelligence. That different Apple Intelligence positioning would be a marketing trick, but it could work. It's already worked for Apple before. We shouldn't forget one thing. Apple's main target is also the mass market. They're not too interested in tech enthusiasts or those who really know their stuff. We know that Retina is just a way of saying a certain screen resolution or definition. But these magic words work on Apple's usual audience. And actually, it would be very clever because Apple could really take advantage of this AI fever. They could even make their delay look like wisdom. We at Apple didn't burn billions on these risky technologies. We let Google, OpenAI, and all the others spend money without limit, and in the end, take all the risks for us. In fact, Apple might come back to try to sell us Apple Intelligence, kind of like selling some local goat cheese. Apple Intelligence stays on your iPhone. It's locally sourced. We don't burn through cash and energy, and honestly, they have something to rely on. Factually, Apple's hardware is already equipped with plenty of neural engines. They can guarantee that part of the artificial intelligence works locally. And above all, that gives them a huge advantage. Apple will really be able to offer free AI since it will run on your smartphone. Whereas the others, and we can especially see this with Samsung, they realize that Gemini, the artificial intelligence, is really cool, but it's extremely expensive. And maintaining this free service for users is going to be complicated. So maybe Gemini will stay free, but it's going to be full of ads. Don't kid yourself. Actually, if I had to sum up this opportunity, it's that Apple could position itself as the shovel seller in the AI gold rush. And we can say it, the Apple shovel is impressive. To support my point, there are other clues in Apple's latest announcements. Apple just announced that it's releasing a creative suite. And what Apple promises with the artificial intelligence in this creative suite isn't really about generating things or automatically generating videos in Final Cut, but rather about providing creative assistance to speed up editing. Basically, Apple is going to use AI without playing the AI card. And among these projects, there's one that interests me in particular, and that's Project Mulberry. In fact, it would involve using all the data you've collected with Apple Watches to provide personalized wellness plans. And here, Apple really has a real opportunity here because they're clearly leaders and dominant in private health data thanks to the Apple Watch. And that really shows what Apple could do with artificial intelligence without making it all about AI. I can really see Apple introducing a service, a personalized coach thanks to this private data, but without making a big deal about having artificial intelligence in your Apple Watch. And artificial intelligence in healthcare, and mark my words, is an absolutely huge market. And if Apple keeps its leading position on this, that's their next big thing. In short, as you can see, there's a world where there's a real marketing opportunity for Apple to position itself as the anti-AI tech manufacturer. To be exact, not anti-AI, but rather against generative AI, predictive AI, toxic AI, slop, and so on. In fact, to position Apple Intelligence as an AI that's here to support humans without trying to replace them. So, is it an opportunistic position or a positioning opportunity? Well, it's a bit of both. Obviously, this would allow Apple to hide how far behind it is and turn it to its advantage. But be careful, this strategy is not without risks either. First, if Siri 2.0 is disappointing, Apple's mainstream audience won't forgive Apple for it. They've still built a technological dependence on Google, on ChatGPT, on other companies that could very easily put obstacles in their way. Apple is also working on the hardware of the future, so the vision will be set aside a bit. They'll focus more on Apple Glass. But all of this will need artificial intelligence to work. The problem of recruiting and keeping the best engineers is going to be a crucial issue for Apple. Will all of this actually lead to a change in leadership at Apple? And when I say leadership, I mean a change of CEO. Maybe now would be the time. Because one thing that is obvious at the beginning of 2026 is that the next stage of the race for intelligence won't be won by accumulating power, but by building more trust. And while Apple is behind in terms of technology, when it comes to trust, they have real strengths. But they're going to have to play it smart. Things could still go off the rails. So tell me in the comments if you think my theory that Apple is an anti-AI company is completely crazy. And in any case, if you're at all interested in my investigations and reports on Apple's strategies, we made a video not long ago about how Apple no longer inspires people. And in the meantime, I'll see you very soon in the next video.